This is the Warwick Bravura. This is an electrostatic headphone. If you've never seen electrostatic headphones, they actually look pretty wild. It gives this driver cup area this really weird looking design. And electrostatic headphones like this one are actually really neat. The technology used in here is actually really sick. There's this super thin substrate sandwiched in between two electrified plates. The name of the specific technology that Warwick uses is high precision electrostatic laminate. And these things are really cool. They're very different from either a dynamic driver or a planar driver like you might be used to seeing. Now, unlike dynamic driver and planar driver headphones, electrostatics come with their own set of advantages and disadvantages. And I've never seen a headphone personify those differences as well as this one does. This video was sponsored by headphones.com, but neither them or Warwick has anything to do with what I say. All thoughts and opinions are of course my own. Now, without headphones.com, I wouldn't be able to review a lot of the products that I review. So I do want to send them a huge shout out and encourage you to go check out their website. They sell high quality amplifiers, DACs, speakers, and of course headphones. If you want to pick up any premium headphone, including the Warwick, that's where I'd recommend doing it. Check out the links down below. Let's talk about build quality because this is top notch and it will make sense when we talk about the price and entry cost of this system. But the build quality of not just this, but the Energizer or amplifier that goes along with it is just insanely good. In the looks department, that will be subjective, of course, but in terms of the precision build quality here, this is as good as I've seen just about any headphone. Now, even though the overall quality of these components is just insane, like it's literally at the top of the market, I have no complaints for quality whatsoever. They did miss some work on just a couple things for me, just some small complaints. One, this cable. It's very well made, but there's two problems with it. One, it's microphonic. So when you have the headphone on, you can hear this brushing up against your shirt. It's also a little bit heavy, though that goes with a nice quality feeling to it. Two, they choose to use these Limo style connectors, which I actually love, but they have this really long head to them that doesn't really flex. And where this comes out on the headphone, it makes this interact with your shoulders when you're turning your head really easily. I do wish they would sort of mirror that system that is used on the HD-800, where the mounting place for this cable is actually higher up here and not at the bottom if they're gonna use a long, high quality connector like this. The other thing that was a miss for me is the clamp force. I've heard that this reduces over time, and I hope it does, because when you initially put this on, this is a lot of clamping force on your head. And I mean like a fair bit of clamping. Now, they definitely want you to have a seal with these so you get like decent bass out of them. But yeah, like just for comfort wise, I do wish this was a little bit looser. I think you could get a clamp with a lot less. And I don't even have that big of a head compared to some of you guys out there, no offense. So if you have a really big head, this is probably gonna clamp quite a bit. Again, it may reduce over time, but that's what I'm feeling right now. Okay, let's talk about Sonoma. So this is the Warwick Bravura headphone, and this is the Warwick Sonoma. They call it an amplifier, energizer, whatever you want to call it. Now, this is unfortunately a proprietary system. So you cannot just buy the Bravura headphones, which are already expensive at $3,000 just by themselves. You have to buy this system to run it with. It will not work off of a Stax energizer. It will not work off of other electrostatic energizers because proprietary cable system. And again, from what I hear, though I can't verify because I don't totally understand the science behind it, to be honest, but what I hear is that this driver that Warwick developed is not actually capable of being driven off of those. So it's not necessarily an adapter issue, it's just incompatible technology. I really wish this wasn't the case, and I would encourage Warwick to produce a kind of Stax compatible system. That way people could get in this cheaper, because right now the entry level cost to get into anything Warwick is $7,000, which is insanely high. And that's higher than some of the best headphone systems that are out there today. And while that may be par for the course for premium electrostatic headphones, that is just about as expensive as it gets for a solid, good quality, like ultra high end, regular headphone system. So you can buy a DAC, an amplifier, and a $5,000 headphone and still come in at less than this cost, which is nuts. Now, normally I would really dislike this level of proprietariness. I really like being able to have options for companies, but if the technology doesn't allow them to work with other brands, like there's not a whole lot I can do or say about that. Also, don't get mad at me for costs. I didn't set the price here. It's just what they're charging for it. So, you know, if you want this system, that's unfortunately the cost of entry for it. Regarding the Energizer, this thing is basically exactly what I would want. It's got the right connections for me personally. It has insane build quality. Like every level of build on this is just really well produced. It could be a little bit heavier if you wanted to plug in your cable without it moving, but the quality of everything else from the knobs to all the toggles are just super high-end feeling. This thing is awesome. It's the right size. It's not overly large to where you're going to struggle with placement issues on your desk. It produces a fair bit of heat, but not too much. One of the disadvantages to having a proprietary system like this is that you're stuck with whatever sound this produces. But because it has analog inputs in the back, you can hook up different DACs or preamplifiers to this with different flavors of sound. And this will push that sound into this headphone. So you do have some options for sound if you want something different flavored. So that brings me into the sound of this. And this is where you start seeing advantages and disadvantages of the system. So on one hand, the speed of electrostatic drivers has been renowned for being extremely fast, possibly even the fastest. I don't know if there's measurements out there showing if the highest end planars are comparable to E-stats, but it just sounds fast. That's a very prevalent characteristic of electrostatic headphones, and this headphone is no exception to that. It sounds extremely speedy. The sound in general is exquisite. It's got this very precise and clean sounding nature to it, and I would call it like controlled illumination for your music. Kind of sounds a little marketing gimmicky, but when you listen to this and when I describe the sound, it might become more apparent why I say that. So for treble response, if this was the standard for treble, I would be a very happy man. Like if every headphone sounded like this, it would just be like a near perfect world. This thing has an incredibly complete sounding treble response without being too bright, without being shiny, without being overly shimmery. It's just very, very clear. Now, compared to the best planar magnetic headphones, which we'll have more comparisons in a second, this does have some advantages to the treble response and some disadvantages. Some planars are a little bit clearer in the top end because their frequencies are pushed a little bit more forward. So a headphone like a Diana TC, I think has a little bit more crystalline and clear sounding top end, but in terms of actual speed and fidelity, they're probably about on par with each other. They're both insanely fast sounding treble responses. I would say that compared to most headphones, this sounds very, very, very controlled while being, again, illuminated. So you kind of see everything in the treble response. And that's a characteristic, that visualization of everything is a characteristic that sticks ubiquitously across all of its frequency ranges. One characteristic of treble is tangibility. Like you actually feel it in a very kind of real tactile way that only a few headphones have been able to reproduce for me is treble response that feels high for their tactility, and their timbre is just super on point. Now, timbre is an area where this headphone excels because of its kind of deadline neutrality. Like if you like a neutral sound, this is as neutral as it gets in my opinion. There is no color to the sound, which again aids its very clear kind of no hidden corners of the sound type of sound. Now for mid-range, this reminds me a lot of the HE-1 and less like E-stats like the Stacks and some of the Hyphemans. This is a very kind of immediately fast sounding voice reproduction headphone. If you listen to a lot of vocals, one of the things that will stand out immediately is the speed of the sound. How, I guess, quick the vocal tonality changes and shifts in texture, how fast that happens. And if I had to guess, this is probably playing even beyond my level of comprehension on that because it's just so fast. And those two things combined just make for like one of the most honest vocal reproductions out there. A bad vocalist will not be able to hide from this headphone, and a good vocalist will absolutely shine on this headphone. And in a weird way, the vocals kind of come across with the intimacy level of like an HG600 series headphone where they're not very far out usually, and they're very intimate. So you get a lot of focus for the vocalists and a lot of presence for vocalists. And everything combined here makes for one of the best vocal sounding headphones that I've come across if you're into neutrality. If you like a lot of warmth, a different headphone might be better, or a tube pairing, for example. If you like a lot of distance or a particular flavor for your vocals, a different headphone would be better. But if you're just looking for like beautiful sounding honesty, this is probably about as good as it gets. It's really good. So those are some of the advantages in terms of frequency response that you can sort of expect with most E-stats, most good ones at least. But now we come to the disadvantage of this, which is an area that is hard for me personally because of my music preference to kind of just let go on the sidelines, and that's bass response. Now, when it comes to bass, this is a very interesting category because in some ways it's very good when it comes to bass speed and overall like transparency and clarity and texture and kind of its, neutral nature showing up in its bass as well. So everything just seems very clean. It's so good at that, like so good. On the other hand though, when you get into the sub bass regions, as you can see by this FR graph, it really doesn't hit very hard. Now, thanks to these graphs by headphones.com, you can actually see that this is lower than the preference window on the sub bass response, like when it gets into the real low regions. And this is something that electrostatic headphones just can't seem to do, and something that planar magnetic headphones really beat out electrostatic headphones for. So you can take a really cheap planar like the Heifman Sundara at $300, and that will have better sub bass performance than this. Maybe not in terms of like speed, but in terms of quantity, you definitely feel a lot more coming out of planars than you do this headphone. So my personal music taste has everything from really clean recordings to really heavy sub bass recordings, and this just doesn't play those very well. There's some songs even that I almost can't even hear the bass that's in it, and I have an example. Young and Beautiful by Lana Del Rey, there's this intro fluctuating bass note. It's a really fun show off kind of thing for a really good system because it's ultra low and it's got a lot of texture in it. On a headphone like Empyrean 2, that is an incredible song to listen to. But on this headphone, that sub bass is almost inaudible. Like you almost can't even hear it. And if someone didn't know to even look for it, they probably wouldn't even know it's there unless they were told. So unfortunately, while some aspects of the bass response as a category, including a mid bass and sub bass, the mid bass is more like a 10 out of 10. It's so good. It's ultra clean, very highly textured. It's great. But then that sub bass is more like a 3 out of 10 for the price. Like it's really not that great. Now, this may not necessarily be an issue for everybody. There's a lot of music that this doesn't apply to. Most natural instruments that humans play or human voices don't go low enough for this to be an issue. So if you listen to a lot of real recordings of like live bands, you'll probably almost never run into this issue if that's primarily what you listen to. If you also don't really care a whole lot about sub bass, which is up to your preference, this is also not something I would bother yourself with. I would more focus on the other things that this is really good with. But if you listen to a lot of music with a lot of ultra low sounds, this is going to be disappointing to you. Now, sound staging is really odd. In terms of like total width, surprisingly, it's not super wide. But what it does have, this has one of the best 3-dimensionality aspects to its soundstage that I've heard. If you get a good recording, this is up there with probably top 3 headphones I've heard for instrument placement and like sound staging, layering and like depth. And so while it's not super wide on the outer regions, the quality is really just insane in the range that it does play. Better than most planars that I listen to. Not all, but most. It's a headphone where if you're comparing the soundstage between this and a really wide soundstaging headphone, it may not seem that impressive. But if you listen to this for like 20 minutes at a time, you will forget that it was ever an issue for you, because it kind of shrinks your kind of audio vision, I guess, down to a smaller field. But the complexity of that field is just so immense that you really don't mind that much. And this part specifically, the way that you can see everything so clearly is why I called it illumination. So it's controlled for the frequency aspect of things. Nothing is out of character for this. Nothing stands out as being unpleasant. Even upper end vocals that are normally really sharp, they don't have an issue with this, but they still come across clear and detailed, which is wild. But the soundstaging clarity and that precision, it illuminates all those different corners of sound in a way that very few headphones do. So yeah, controlled illumination for the overall sound. So with the comparisons here, one of the difficulties is that with the amplifier that they're using, it's hard to parse out what the sound of the amplifier is and what the sound of the Bravura is. Because if it was played on a different amplifier, let's say, I might be able to isolate the commonalities between the 2 amps, but also know what the difference is between the 2 amps. But I can't do that. So I kind of have to review this as a system, so bear that in mind. Versus HE-1, I haven't heard this recently enough to really draw sonic comparisons, but Having spent time with that and really trying to memorize the feeling, the fit and finish of everything, I actually think that the fit and finish of this headphone is better, even though the comfort is worse. The headband and head pads are not quite as lush and plush feeling as the HE-1 is. Now, compared to some of the best planars that are out there, there are some real advantages to both sides. All of these have far better bass than the Bravura does. Like, it's not close. The highest detail bass on here is probably the AB1266. It's got the right amount of detail, but it also has a bit of a bass shelf, which helps that bass stand out even more than a lot of these other ones do. And it's far cleaner than this system is, for example, the Empyrean 2, even though the Empyrean 2 is really good. Now, compared to planar magnetic headphones, I mean, this is kind of an argument from system to system and driver type to driver type. The barrier to entry for planars is very cheap. You can get a really good one for like $300 with like a Headphone Sundara. But even if you go really high end for this, like these are $3,000, right? These Empyrean 2s. You can make a system that sounds awesome for like 4,000 bucks with this. You pair this with an incredible DAC and amplifier, and it will sound absolutely killer. And you can just get into this system for way, way less. And this is one of the best planar headphones out there. Whereas the cost of entry, the barrier to entry for a really good E-Stat system like this is just so insanely high. I would also say that overall, like, toughness is a thing. I'm not sure about the Bravura, but like with the Sax headphones, you basically have to keep those covered anytime you're not using them because dust can be an issue. Whereas planars kind of have the toughness relatively figured out. I haven't had an issue with planars in years, really, unless like it was physically dropped somewhere. But yeah, just like sitting, they should be perfectly fine. I'm not sure about the Bravura, but with other E-Stats in the past, you really need to store them when you're not using them. So those are just kind of some things to think about when you're comparing the two systems. When you're comparing individual sound, let's take the Empyrean 2 and the MR because both things are applicable to the Bravura. These are like really good jack of all trade headphones. They have good sound staging, they have good bass, they have good mid-range, they have good treble response. Compared to any priced headphones, they may not have the best of any one particular area. Like the 1266 has better bass than both of these. But I think that the mid-range and treble response of both of these is a little bit better than the 1266. A headphone like the HE-100 might be wider than both of these, but the other things like bass, mid-range, and treble are better than that of the HE-100. So they're really good. They're the best at being the jack of all trades for headphones. And that's what makes them some of the best headphones for planars that exist. This is less like that. It's more of a specialty. So it's very special for mid-range. It's very special for treble, and it's very special for like three-dimensionality within its soundstage, but it's not special for bass. It's not special for soundstaging width, and it may not be special for specific characteristics if you're not looking for a neutral headphone. So if you want something warmer, like the Empyrean 2, this is way less warm than that. So you may have a preference right away just on that alone. So if you must have an E-Stat, I actually do think that this is probably the one that I would recommend the most. The E-Stats that I've tried on the lower end of price are not nearly as good as this, and they're also not as good as their comparatively priced planar magnetic headphones. And this also isn't as pricey as some extreme E-Stat systems like that of Headphone, Warwick's higher end headphone system, and of course the HE-1. I would love to see a version of this that was Stax compatible. That way people could get in for a lot less money. Something around $4,000 is still an insane amount of money to spend on a headphone, but it's a lot more plausible than $7,000. I think the advantages of this E-Stat is undeniable. It's got some really great traits, but the cost of entry for this and the limitations of the technology itself are holding it back. It's undeniably one of the best in certain situations. It's just not the best in every situation. Now, if I can just speak to my personal experience here, this has been one of the most fun headphones that I've had come across my desk in a while. It's one of those headphones where I get a unique version of sound that I've never heard before. That is always like really fun for me to do. It's also something that inspires me to go back and listen to every song and artist that I love on this. And that's not something I do with a lot of other headphones. It gives like a unique vibe and feel and sound to the listening experience. Now, if this is a headphone where you're looking at this price and you don't really care that it costs that much, and you like the type of music that I would recommend for this, things that are really acoustic focused recordings, things that aren't super bass driven for their rhythm or kind of their general sound, then this is one of the best headphones at doing that. But if you're not that person, there is probably a different headphone out there that might be better suited to you. So I think Warwick are very aware that this is for a specific type of customer who likes a specific type of sound. But when you build a headphone like this for a specific customer, it means that everybody who's not that person is not that person. You're not that guy, pal. You're not that guy. Okay, yeah. Thanks Headphones for sponsoring this video. Thank you Warwick for sending this out for a review. I want to thank everybody who helped make this possible. And it's been a really, really fun experience. I'm mad I have to send it back. All right, thanks a lot for watching. See you guys next time. Bye.